A group of friends decide to take a vacation, but little did they know that it might just be their last. Will they survive or will they succumb to the dangers of the cabin? Let's find out in a 2016 horror movie titled Cabin Fever. Watch out and spoilers ahead. The movie starts with Henry, a forest dweller. He returns from hunting and finds that his dog, Pancake, has died of an unknown disease and is completely covered in blood. As he checks on his dog, the dog's blood splatters all over his face. Next, we see Marcy, Jeff, Bert, Karen and Paul go on a vacation and decide to stay in a cabin in the woods, escaping the stress of the city. They stop at a local store to get some supplies and notice a little boy, Dennis, wearing a rabbit mask sitting at front of the shop. When Paul approaches Dennis to greet him, he suddenly bites Paul's hand. The boy's father, Tommy, runs out and scolds his son for biting Paul. Paul tries to calm Tommy down, but Tommy tells Paul not to interfere. Tommy tells them that his boy, Dennis, isn't like other kids and everyone knows that they are not supposed to talk to him. Paul and Tommy argue over the incident and Tommy finally tells Paul to go and wash his hands. Paul washes his hand while the rest of the group enters the store to get supplies. A local warns them to be careful, especially when hiking in the woods. He tells them that Lyme disease is pretty common in the woods. He also advises them to be very careful of ticks, as a few hikers got sick, and the doctors were unable to heal them. Bert tries and steals a chocolate bar and gets caught by the store owner who gets angry. Soon after, the group continues their journey and arrive at the rented cabin in the woods. They receive a welcome letter that informs them that they are in the wrong place if they are looking for fun. Bert gets furious when he finds out that there is no Wi-Fi or reception, and he will not be able to game the whole time they are there. Elsewhere, Marcy and Jeff go upstairs to the bedroom and make out. Bert brings a rifle to the cabin to practice his gaming skills. Paul thinks it is dangerous as he might accidentally kill one of them. Bert mistakenly fires the weapon, almost killing Paul. Bert then decides to light up a campfire and goes hunting in the forest, while Karen and Paul talk near the lake. They share a kiss and end up going for a swim together. While in the woods, Bert is startled and accidentally shoots a hermit guy. When the hermit comes closer, he is covered in blood and looks ill. Bert tells him not to come any closer and threatens him with gunshots. Bert then runs away, even though he asks for his help. Back at the cabin, Paul scolds Bert for leaving the campfire unattended. Bert decides not to tell anyone about what happened in the woods. Later that evening, the group gathers around a campfire and shares stories. While Paul shares a fake childhood story, a man named Grim with his dog called Dr. Mambo interrupts them. The group accuses him of spying, but he denies it. Grim says that he hasn't seen anyone in the woods for a week and decided to come and say hello when he saw the smoke from their campfire. The group are unsure about Grim and want him to leave, but he pulls out a bag of weed to share with them. They all smoke and talk all night. When it looks like it is about to rain, Grim decides to go back to his tent. The group return to the cabin and continue their conversations. Suddenly they hear a knock on the door and assume it is Grim, but it turns out to be the hermit guy covered in blood from the woods. He begs them to help him. He notices Bert, who quickly closes the door. Desperate for help, the hermit decides to steal their car and while doing so, vomits blood all over the inside of the car. The group quickly run outside. Bert shoots the wheels of the car and Paul smashes up the windscreen. The hermit guy jumps out of the car and Marcy pours gasoline all over his body. Jeff gets a log of wood from the fire and lights him up. The man runs off into the woods on fire screaming in pain. The group are shocked and feel bad about what happened but agree it was in self-defense. Karen suggests they tell the police about it in the morning. The next morning, they discuss their plan and all start arguing with each other. They blame each other for what happened and damaging the car. Marcy decides to go and get help and goes off alone. Jeff and Bert also do the same and go looking in the forest. Karen is still scared about what happened last night. She claims they should have helped the guy and cries. Paul tries to convince and console her. After a long walk, Jeff and Bert spot a house and decide to check if anybody is in. They see a woman lamenting over an infected animal sold to her. They tell the woman that they need a mechanic, and she agrees to help them. She invites them into the house, and they explain what happened last night. While telling her about the crazy hermit guy, the woman thinks that they might be talking about her cousin. When they are shown a photo of him, they both panic and lie to her and leave the house quickly. Marcy returns from the lake but is frightened when Bert touches her from behind. She asks Bert and Jeff if they found anyone, but they lie and tell her no. Meanwhile, Deputy Winston arrives at the cabin to investigate the previous night's incident. Paul explains that a guy who looked infected tried to attack them and then ran off into the woods. After making a few notes, she tells him to enjoy their stay and that she will send a tow truck the next day. When the deputy has left, Bert and Paul try and clean the car. While cleaning the car, Grim's dog suddenly appears behind them. Marcy comes out and scares the dog away with a rifle. Jeff suggests to the group that they all should leave immediately, but Paul thinks it's better to wait for Deputy Winston. While Jeff and Bert try and fix the tire on the car, Grim's dog appears again. Jeff shoots at the dog and tries to scare him off, but the dog doesn't appear to even flinch. Meanwhile inside, Karen is feeling nauseous and decides to go upstairs to bed. Paul quickly follows to check on her. In bed they soon start to get intimate, and when Paul tries to put his hands between Karen's legs, she starts to squirm and tells him to stop. When Paul removes his hand from between Karen's legs, he notices it has blood all over it. When they pull the covers back, they see that Karen's legs are all covered in blood with some kind of skin disease. Paul, horrified by all this, calls for help. The rest of the group enter the room and are shocked by what they see. The group are terrified of catching the disease and decide to lock her in the room. Karen screams and asks for help, but the group tell her that help will arrive soon, and it is best for her to stay in the room. After that, they all check themselves for any sign of infection. They decide to keep Karen quarantined for the safety of everyone. Paul gets tired of waiting. He decides to go and find help despite the dangers. While looking in the woods at night, Paul hears a dog growling and dares the dog to attack him. Meanwhile, Marcy brings food for Karen and begs her to eat, but she refuses and asks to be left alone. In the woods, Paul finds a minivan and decides to look inside. Suddenly a woman with a shotgun comes out and shouts at him to leave. While trying to explain to the woman, a man jumps out of the minivan, and they scare Paul away. Paul returns back to the cabin and sees Bert. They both go inside. Marcy has made dinner for everyone, but no one is in the mood to eat. The group start to argue with each other, thinking any one of them could be infected. While Bert drinks a glass of water and tries to calm down, Paul suggests that they should stick together and not fight with each other. When Paul glances out of the window, he suddenly sees Grim's dog again covered in blood with its flesh peeling off his legs. The dog tries to attack Karen in the shed but then suddenly disappears. The group all come outside to search for the dog to find blood marks all over the door. When they call out for Karen, she doesn't respond. Thinking she is asleep, they all go back inside. The next morning, when they go to check on Karen, they discover that she is in a worse state with her body covered in blood and her skin falling off her body. Bert manages to fix the car engine, and when they try to help Karen up to get in the car, he starts coughing up blood. Jeff refuses to get in the car with Karen. Just then Karen splatters out blood over the car and Jeff. The group start to argue and notice Bert has been infected too. Bert gets angry and decides to drive off to look for help. Jeff goes into the cabin and drinks water from the tap. Worried about getting infected, he decides to leave the cabin and isolate in the woods by himself until help arrives. Meanwhile, Paul tries and cleans the cabin, disposing of all the clothing covered in blood. Inside the cabin, Paul and Marcy talk. She believes they all will soon be infected and they share an intimate moment. Bert is seen driving to the store and asks Tommy for help. He notices that Bert is also sick and instructs him not to come closer. While waiting outside, Dennis jumps up and runs towards Bert and bites him on the hand. Tommy comes out and yells at him for infecting his son and calls Finster to fetch a gun. Bert quickly gets in the car and drives off. The old man advises Tommy to kill all the infected people to stop the spread of the disease in the area. Karen's condition continues to worsen as the disease seems to have taken over her whole body. Tommy and his friends chase Bert and try to ram his car off the road. Bert's car runs out of fuel. He jumps out and runs into the woods. At the cabin, Paul comes to Marcy's room to find her back full of scars which look infected. He decides to leave on foot and find Jeff. Marcy takes a bath to clean herself up and the scars on her back are oozing blood. The skin all over her body has been infected and she screams in fear. While Paul is looking for Jeff at the lake, the hermit man from the first night jumps out and pulls Paul into the lake. They get into a fight and the hermit man tries to drown Paul. Paul manages to get away and realizes that the virus is in the lake. Meanwhile, Bert is seen running in the woods trying to escape from Tommy and his gang. He leaves a fake trail for them to follow as he makes his way back to the cabin. Next, Marcy is seen covered in blood, walking out of the cabin desperately screaming for help. As she falls to the ground, Grim's dog appears again and lunges at her, tearing her into pieces. When Paul hears Marcy's screams while being attacked, he rushes back to the cabin to find her dismembered body. He then hears Karen's screams from the shed. He gets a rifle from inside and opens the shed door to find the dog mauling Karen. He shoots and kills the dog. Karen begs Paul to kill her as well. Paul gathers the courage, but when he tries to shoot her, the rifle jams. He decides to try and kill Karen with a shovel by dismembering her head. This doesn't work, and she is seen writhing around in pain on the floor. Paul decides to get a can of gasoline and throws it all over her. He then sets her on fire and shuts the door while she burns alive. While outside, Paul sees Bert behind him crawling on the floor. Bert tries to warn Paul about Tommy and his gang when suddenly Tommy shoots Bert in the head. Thinking that Paul's rifle is out of ammo, Tommy toys with Paul. Suddenly Paul is able to release the safety switch from his rifle and kills Tommy and all his gang. Paul then jumps into Tommy's abandoned truck and goes looking for help. While driving, he notices that his hand is also infected. He panics and crashes into a tree. He manages to get out of the truck just before it explodes. While continuing to walk and look for help, Paul comes across Winston and two other people in the woods. He shouts at her and asks why she didn't send anyone to help yesterday. Just then a message comes through Winston's radio about the incident at the cabin. The sheriff orders her to shoot and kill any of the outsiders on site. Winston decides not to kill Paul and tells him about a shortcut which leads to the main road. Paul runs off but is not able to find the path. Winston has lied to him and he collapses in the woods in disbelief. The next morning, Jeff returns to the cabin and discovers that everyone is dead and can't believe what has happened. He is the only one that has managed to survive. Unfortunately, when he looks down at his hand, his joy is cut short as he realizes he is infected too. Suddenly a bullet hits Jeff and kills him. We see Winston holding a sniper. Later, Paul's body is found dead in the woods and the police are seen arriving at the cabin to clear up all the dead bodies. In the closing scene, a girl views Karen's last posts online, including pictures of their road trip, the cabin, Paul trying to kill her and pictures of her rotten body. The film ends there. You guys are awesome if you have made it this far in the video. If you want to see more of such movie recaps, hit the subscribe button to become part of our movie family.